Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the next in our series of discussions on Caribbean 30 by 30. We are here today to discuss some more, as we did last week, with Caribbean leaders about the Caribbean's role in the 30 by 30 goal. And I'm sorry, my computer does very well at reminding me of the time. So as we begin today, we are very happy to have with us two Caribbean government leaders to discuss further the issue of the Caribbean 30 by 30 in terms of welcome. My name is Karen McDonald Gayle, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And in terms of our truths and our history, the CBF is set up out of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, which you will hear some more about soon. It was one of the original programs that had these visions of goals and the 20 by 20 goal. And the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund was set up to ensure that the goals were bolstered by financial aid and financial support to conservation in the region. So I'm very pleased to be here. The CBF is celebrating its 10th year this year, and so it is even more poignant for us to be in these discussions that start to discuss past 20 by 20, which has come and gone, and on to 30 by 30. The 30 by 30 discussion is much more of a global discussion. And what we want to talk about today is the Caribbean's role in 30 by 30. And I am joined by ministers from two countries in the region, two countries that I'm very close to and very, very pleased to be able to speak to these two ministers. First, from Grenada, the Senator, the Honorable Simon Stiell, is the Minister of Climate Resilience, the Environment, Forestry, Fisheries, Disaster Management, and Information. So a mouthful, and we will hear more on all of those portfolios, I am sure. And from Jamaica, my homeland, Senator the Honorable Matthew Samuda is the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation with responsibility for environment. So welcome to both ministers. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think it would be best to open with an opening statement and an opening reflection on Caribbean 30 by 30 and what it means for you both. In particular, Grenada was a leader in the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the original 20 by 20 goal. And so now as we look to 30 by 30, we would love to hear from Senator the Honorable Simon Stiell about what he thinks of the way forward with this 30 by 30 goal and the Caribbean's involvement. Senator Stiell?
Well, thank you, Karen, and good afternoon to my good friend in Jamaica, Matthew. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this discussion and to be part of the Caribbean's leadership in terms of addressing some of the global challenges that we face, whether it is biodiversity loss, whether it is climate change, bearing in mind that as a region, just the level of vulnerability that we face in these two interconnected areas, and of course, broader issues, whether it is pollution or some of the other, many other vulnerability challenges that we face. But what I think is quite remarkable about the 30 by 30 initiative, it does build on efforts that were made within the region, starting as far back as 2013 with the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the goal to place under protection 20% of our nearshore environment by 2020. And of the 11 countries, many met that target. Some of us still have a way to go. But what is very clear by the 3030 initiative, it increases the level of ambition there. And as you mentioned in your opening, Karen, that is at a global level. And those of us who can make a greater contribution to that target should do so. Those who are unable to, but balancing out that need and that recognition to tackle the global challenges that we face, that 30 by 30 challenge is highly appropriate. And the point I would touch on, and I think we'll expand on in this session, is that there have been reflections as to the successes and the challenges that many of us still face with the 2020 challenge, and how some of those gaps, how some of those shortcomings can be filled as we increase that level of ambition, but the increase in necessary support, the collaboration both at a regional level and a global level that will be needed for us to achieve what we know we need to achieve, what the science tells us we have to do by 2030.
Thank you, Minister Stiell. Indeed, and indeed, one of the issues and one of the lessons learned from the 20 by 20 process was how we move forward with other aspects. Minister Samuda, if you could add your thoughts on the 30 by 30 process.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Karen, and greetings to my good friend as well, Minister Stiell. The 30 by 30 process for the Caribbean, I think, brings to life much of the commitments that we make at the varying fora that we attend. I've often asked myself, how do we translate attendance to these meetings to genuine action that achieves the intention or the articulated intention and ambition of these meetings? And I think the 30 by 30 initiative is one such way, and it's particularly important to Jamaica, is particularly important to the Caribbean. The product that we have sold to the world, certainly since independence, kind of as a region, has largely been sun, sand, and sea. So in essence, in many ways, there can be no divorcing the economic prospects of the region from the environmental prospects of the region. And I think the 30 by 30 initiative encapsulates this acceptance as widely as you're going to be able to get it. It is bringing to life the very important considerations that we all face as governments, that we all face as citizens in the space. We have a land shortage. We don't have the sort of land that we need to be powerhouses in agriculture. So it's very difficult when you have these considerations around 30% protection. But we also have water shortages. We're also on the front lines of the climate battle. So any consideration not to protect this space also puts us in particular peril. When you consider our ocean space, for most islands in the Caribbean, our EEZ exceeds our land space, but yet we don't necessarily think of ourselves as ocean states, right? We're very antiquated in how we approach our blue economy. And I think this is an opportunity for us to move in a particular direction, because designing that 30% protected space is particularly important as you're going to move into ensuring that your economic extraction from your blue space, from your EEZ, is indeed done in a sustainable manner. So I'm very excited to go into the discussions this afternoon. I think it's very fruitful and very important for us as Caribbean nations, as Caribbean brothers and sisters, to ensure that our mission is aligned with each other. There are many challenges we face, and I think this particular forum allows us to discuss how we approach them together, how we get buy-in from all parties to hit this very important target of 30-30 by 2030. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a good segue into the discussion on the blue and green economies and the values that they bring to the discussions. Indeed, one of the points that we've always been discussing is that actual definition of protected areas, that this is not about not touching the lands. This is about making sure that what we're doing preserves, conserves, and duly considers what is important for us in the Caribbean. I would love to hear from you both a little bit more about your blue and green economy programs and how you think they will be useful to the 30 by 30 process. Minister Stiell, maybe you will start us.
Yes, thank you, Karen. I think building on what Matthew touched on is identifying that link between our ecosystems and our economies, and recognizing that the strong dependency interlinkage between that. Our economies, which are so heavily dependent on our tourism sector, which is dependent on healthy ecosystems. People, visitors, they are coming to our shores to see those pristine beaches, those azure waters, our intact coral reefs, our rich fauna and flora. So ensuring the health of those not just from an environmental perspective, and the benefits that brings from living within a healthy environment, but it is central to that product that is so important to us. So drawing on that at that most basic level is a key consideration. But then going beyond that, understanding the role that our blue and green economies play in whether it's the battle against climate change. So the use of nature-based solutions in protecting those assets that are of such great value to us, and recognizing the need to protect our mangroves, our coral reefs, our rainforests, what we have on land, what we have at sea, is so critical to building our own national resilience, but also its contribution, not from a landmass perspective in terms of carbon capture, but as Matthew said, our EEZs are so much greater than the small land masses we have. We are great ocean nations. Grenada, our marine space is 70 times that of our land mass. And when you aggregate that across the Caribbean region, we are a significant carbon sink. Our oceans, the carbon capture value of our oceans is something like 3 times greater than that of our forests. So when you aggregate our marine spaces within the region, we are a high value carbon sink on a global scale, and recognize how we could potentially monetize that to feed back into our healthy ecosystems, and doing the things that we need to do to protect and to manage those ecosystems, I think is going to be a critical output of some of the work that takes place between now and 2030 as part of the 3030 initiative. So I think we stand at a critical point, and that the relevance of this program at this time couldn't be more apt than it is. So it offers many of the levers. And Karen, you mentioned, the considerations. Yes, we want to conserve and preserve, but it's doing that within the context of our development, our sustainable development, and ensuring that development and our need to conserve and preserve are hand in glove.
Thanks. Minister Samuda, anything to add? And in particular, maybe what are the challenges and the messages you have for those of us working on this blue and green economy outlook going forward as Caribbean nations?
Well, I think a very good place to start, Karen, is the fact that we are ocean states, so our economic development should largely be centered around a blue economy strategy. And I think as we move into further into the 21st century, and we're facing the particular challenges of environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and indeed, as we barrel towards 2030, it's very important that we do indeed have a green economy strategy, as all economies have to green themselves of sorts if they're to be sustainable and survivable. And certainly when we think of the Caribbean and nations our size, many of us don't have our own carbon sources of fuel. If we don't get our green economy strategy right, we're going to continue to be susceptible to these shocks and these geopolitical spots that have bedeviled us since the 1960s, certainly in the post-carbon era. I think it's important to note that 30-30 target is, in our belief, aligned with the GOJ's thrust to pursue blue and green economy strategies. Jamaica, with the support of the World Bank, is currently implementing the Blue Economy Framework project aimed at creating and enabling the environment for further fostering development of Jamaica's blue economy and promoting sustainable use and management of ocean and marine resources. This is also supported by the work that Jamaica has done through its membership to the HLP for a sustainable ocean economy. Jamaica is very clear in our context that the work we've done there can be transplanted and is work that should be shared with our neighbors in a particular space. We don't look at protection as cutting off economic value in this space. In fact, we look at it as enhancing that economic value. We had the benefit of a study done by Pristine Seas on the protected area priorities for the Jamaican waters. And it showed three things. It showed the areas best for biodiversity protection. It showed the areas best for carbon sequestration. And then it showed the areas best for food production. And what I took away from that study more than anything else is that if we protected the areas recommended, we could see our fish yield move from 15,000 metric tons to 200,000 metric tons done sustainably with the right policy mix to support it. But it says to you that when you do these things, there is economic benefit. And I think that's something that we don't always explain to our populace well, that this isn't some first world concept that we're trying to impose on them that cuts their way of life. We're actually trying to put something in the proverbial kitty to ensure that we can extract in a sustainable way at a later date so that we are indeed ahead of the global curve. And I think it's an important from our blue economy space. Usually when you talk to your European colleagues, their concept of the blue economy is largely built around the shipping industry and the logistics industry. That's not the Caribbean's real growth point. We don't own any major shipping lines. Our blue economy is largely built on coastal tourism. It's built on some cruise. Jamaica and I think Trinidad more than others and even Cuba now are developing some logistics capacity, but really our blue economy has been built on the experiential side. So preservation of that product is particularly important if we're to maintain what we have and to continue to grow from strength to strength. The other thing that the Caribbean hasn't done as well as it really can do in the blue economy space is really develop large scale but sustainable fisheries. And in fact, if we don't protect these areas and put in place the infrastructure to protect these areas, we'll find that through illegal fishing and unregulated fisheries, these large scale trawlers will come and extract our blue wealth, which really belongs to our people without us doing what we need to do. So I think that those are some important points and things that we need to work on as a region, and we need to sell the story that protection actually does equal to economic value at the back end. On the green economy side, I had mentioned how important it is certainly for energy security, but in the Jamaican context, the green economy investment strategy for Jamaica is built on 6 economic sectors and has been prepared and is actually nearing submission to cabinet. We actually would have just considered yesterday our new EV policy, which the Prime Minister will speak to in his budget presentation on Thursday, which we're pretty excited about because we believe there is a whole economy to be built and a whole industry to be built around our transition to cleaner use of fuels, certainly in our transportation sector. And we expect, as we also transition megawatt at a time with our renewables push, that there will be a whole industry and support services that will come along with it that will also hit our employment targets. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. I think there are a number of very useful and interesting initiatives on the Jamaican side. I think now to maybe the harder questions, and this is for the regional approach. Jamaica and Grenada have both signed and are working feverishly on the 30 by 30 goal. What is the message to the other Caribbean countries maybe with some ideas as to why they haven't signed, and why you think it's important for them to join and sign the Caribbean 30 by 30 goal. Minister Stiell?
Well, I think the first message is a strength in numbers. What we can achieve collectively is far more than what we can do individually. So the leadership of those that have signed on to this are ready. That as a Caribbean man does not satisfy me. It's not until we are all, pushing together. And I think that the starting point, it's some of the things and more that we've just discussed in terms of what the benefits are, what the opportunities are. And I think the best lens to view that through would actually be to start with the challenges that we face, whether that is economic, whether that is in the fight, the war against climate change, and many of the things that bog us down, that overwhelm us. But by linking those to some of the solutions, and then through that, some of the financing that is available globally, and we can come on to speaking about some of the challenges that we've had in accessing some of those global funds. But the opportunity lies there. The global conversation, the language that is being used in terms of our vulnerabilities, be they economic, be they physical, be they social, is now aligned and reflective of the challenges that we face. The gap that exists is converting that politically correct language, that aligned language, to the resources that we require to build resilience in all of those areas, of which 30 by 30 is an important, will be an important component. So I believe that is where the conversation needs to be repositioned. And that is speaking to our international partners, our development partners, the donors, but as said, aligning our needs, aligning our challenges, but then recognizing the opportunities and tying those to the resources. And I think through that conversation, more of us who may be less turned on, if you like, by the by just singular elements of the conversation, just from a conservation and preservation perspective, and that is broadened to its fuller context. And those benefits can be articulated. Those benefits can be articulated in terms of programs that are financed, that are at scale, that do plug some of these gaps and allow those benefits to filter down. I believe by moving the conversation there, I think we can get more of our brothers and sisters within the region involved. And then through showing that leadership, and one of the advantages that we have as a region, our small size can be flipped to be a global advantage in terms of our responsiveness, our fleet of being fleet of foot, in terms of being able to demonstrate what can be done, albeit on a small scale, but as a demonstration to larger, more developed countries. And I think through taking that regional leadership perspective and pulling the attention of other regions to what we can achieve, I think will benefit us further in terms of some of those resources that demonstration can unlock. So I think getting into these conversations, I think could help pull some of our neighbors into this initiative and bring the scale that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, and quickly to add a little bit more about the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and our network, the Caribbean Sustainable Financing Architecture that we've developed all through the original CCI concept, where there are national conservation trust funds set up and established in 10 countries, working towards 12 in the Caribbean, already to think about ideas for sustainable financing for conservation at the local level, at the national level. So making sure that the voices that are being placed and the emphasis that is being placed on conservation is based on what the needs are nationally. So we're very proud of that achievement. And we think it is a useful instrument and tool as we move forward with the 30 by 30 goals and this idea of figuring out the best way of financing and opportunities for both government and non-government actors in the space that we need for reaching that 30 by 30 goal. And so the same question to you, Minister Samuda, in terms of the message to the Caribbean leaders, in terms of why it's important for them to be involved with Caribbean 30 by 30.
I think in many ways, the question has been answered quite well by yourself and Minister Stiell. So I'd first like to associate myself with the answers you both provided. I think we need to start simply from the perspective that we are so much more powerful when we band together, and our position of negotiation is so much stronger when we're aligned and committed to some of the same principles. When we go to the large multilaterals, the donor agencies, when we work, with agencies like yours and funds like yours to ensure that we are able to attract bigger funds, it's very important that there is a unity of purpose in this space. One of the things that comes out of these discussions, and not just related to environmental matters as this is, but it's difficult for some of your larger neighbors and your big brothers and sisters to the north to have 20 conversations. It works much better for them when they're able to have one or two, but there are a few things that have to be in place. There has to be unity of purpose and unity of targets. And there also has to be a well-matured project development system right across the region. So I think there are two issues that we need to focus on. Something myself and Simon were discussing at UNIA in Kenya. It's how do we leverage the significant capacity of all of us to ensure that we're A, represented where we need to be represented, and that B, we're able to fill the gaps that we all individually have in our capacity for project building, for policy building, for legislation, to ensure that we're generally moving in similar direction, at least singing from the same hymn book. Jamaica has believed it's important to sign on to the 3030 initiative. We are members of the High Ambition Coalition. We are members of the HLP, as I mentioned, and we are members of the Global Ocean Alliance. One of the things that I have found, certainly from my time as minister, and even my time giving support to the portfolio before, is there is not a lack of willingness, I think, from many leaders to join these movements and to make these commitments. The issue and the fear is, do we have the resources to implement in a particular way within the time frame that we have? And I think COVID may have entrenched that fear, because you see just how fickle the resource and the fiscal space that we have really is. So I think it comes back to Simon's point that we're going to have to band together to ensure that we're able to say to the global community, these are the resource needs that we do have to be able to make these commitments and B, stick to them. And I think if we have that as a cohesive discussion, we'll be able to get that sort of commitment from the international community, but it has to be on the back of regional agreement. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to push to do, Simon, and push our own prime ministers to do, is to make sure that these issues get put on the CARICOM agenda front and center. Not to say that any of the issues that are front and center now are any less important, but I don't think that the environmental agenda has necessarily been as prevalent and as strong as it should be in the CARICOM meetings as it can be. And I think that's the appropriate forum to see if we can get some consensus there and bring our leaders along in a manner that says to the world, we are committed to targets of 3030 and all the other associated targets of biodiversity protection and restoration and protection, etc. Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
Minister Samuda. And I think it was a direct question to Minister Stiell, but just to add, what's needed and what do we need for the other countries? Is there anything you think we should be doing as a region, as fellow governments, as CBF and those partners trying to help with this process to get the other countries on to that 30 by 30 goal?
So I think the obvious starting point is mapping out where the support is coming from, identifying the priority areas, translating that into what the benefits are, both hard and soft, and the support is there. We often sign up, our history is signing up to initiatives that promise a lot, but when push comes to shove, those resources are not there, and it becomes a box-ticking exercise. It becomes an academic exercise, pilot after pilot, proof of concept after proof of concept that just evaporates, that requires significant effort to execute and administer, but the returns based on the low scale and sometimes the low priority don't warrant the effort. So there is a jaded feeling within the region. So spelling out those priority areas that are reflective of our true needs, are relevant, benefits clearly articulated, but critically, the resources to execute meaningfully are also presented, I think just moves the conversation on, at a much accelerated rate.
Thank you. And I think to wrap up, the same question for you, Minister Samuda, in terms of what's needed and what can any of us here do in terms of getting full commitment from the region on the 30 by 30 goal?
Well, I think my view isn't that divergent from Simon's view. There is a level of cynicism amongst our leaders that when you commit to these targets, you get the resources that's required. And you need these resources, not just to hit these targets, but to ensure that there isn't large-scale displacement amongst your citizens and residents as you realign some of your economic and environmental priorities. And I think the raising of these funds has largely been the main reason for the cynicism. But I think speaking with one voice can make our case that much stronger to ensure we get the resources. There is something even as a precursor to the 30 by 30 goal that I think all leaders need to be very clear on. We need to be very direct with the fact that harmonization of the application process for financing is critical to the Caribbean and all cities. We need to be very clear that even with the harmonization, there has to be a reduction in the requirements for small island developing states. It doesn't make sense to spend 3 to 5 years writing projects to get money that by that time is outdated, or projects that deal with problems which have gotten progressively worse. So I think we're going to need to speak with one voice, and perhaps not necessarily so elegantly, in a manner which supports the fact that there's a bit of reparations justice in this. And this is real time, this is life now. And the actions of taxpayers in our neighbors to the north, and even in south, depending on the economy you look at, are having the impact on us now. So this isn't a historical discussion that is sometimes very difficult for our neighbors to accept. This is one where their actions now are having the impact on us now. And I think if we speak in that sort of unified tone and with that unified message, I think the importance on how we see it will become clear. And if we're able to do that, it is my hope. Certainly was my hope pre the Ukraine-Russian conflict, but it is still my hope that we will have the ears and the action from those larger economies that we desperately need.
And I think just to add as well, the discussion that we have in the Caribbean Sustainable Finance and Architecture is not about projects, because projects are too short term. It's about long-term development goals for the countries. the projects just being the starting point. And the other is the realization that in an environmental setting, some of the goals that we're setting are 5 and 10 years beyond the normal donor cycle of visioning. And so it's important for us to have those goals within the Caribbean ourselves so that we can tell clearly what we're looking for and be able to showcase when we've achieved them in the time frame that makes sense to us. So I think you are right on track in terms of changing the message, as you said, maybe a little more forcefully than we have before as the region, to say what we've learned and what we know will work for the region as we go forward. So with that, I would like to thank you both for your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you and learning more about the Caribbean 30 by 30. Both of you will be in Geneva, yes, in the coming weeks to the meeting of the Convention on Biological Diversity, where this will be discussed further. And we wish those discussions all the best. And we hope that the countries of the region will also have their voices heard on the matter. For more information on the Caribbean 30 by 30, go to Caribbean30x30.org, and you can learn all about what we've been doing and what the goals are, the global goal of 30 by 30 for land and sea, the value of protection, and some of the assets that we need to think about in terms of protection and going forward. Again, Minister Stiell, Minister Samuda, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to continuing discussions with you on this very important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ram.
Thank you, Matthew.